Hello to those that have come in. There's still a couple more. Um, Give me a second. All right, we'll just get started. And then as more people come in, we'll welcome them. We want to welcome everybody to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work as members of MWEG. We're glad that you're joining us today. We have a guest from the Voting Rights Lab. We have Chris Diaz, who's the Director of Legislative Tracking, and he is going to talk to us today about bill tracking and what that looks like and what the Voter Rights Lab does and how we can do that ourselves. So I'm going to turn the time over to him to introduce the that organization and introduce himself.
Hi, thanks, Rachel. Good to be with you all today. My name is Chris Diaz. I'm the Director of Legislative Tracking at Voting Rights Lab. We've done a lot of work in a few different states with MWEG, and I know you guys have been great friends to us, so really happy to be here today to share this tool with you all. So I'm just going to dive right into it and share my screen. Let me so just to give a little bit of background, our election law tracker is a tool that is a database of current election law in all 50 states and DC, and then also legislation that's been introduced in all those state legislatures and the DC Council that would impact election law. So we've been doing this since 2020, but the current database goes back to 2021. And we have it's over 8,000 pieces of legislation now. We summarize all these bills. We have a tagging system of over 800 labels specific to different policy changes that a bill might make that we can apply. And then through the tool, you can see different policies you're interested in tracking, or if there's a state you want to track, and really get a really detailed look into what legislation has been introduced and is moving. So sort of this is the homepage at tracker.votingrightslab.org. And there's sort of, like I mentioned, the two main sections of the site. One is the current law, and then the other is the legislation. So I'm going to start with the legislation, which you can get to from clicking bill search, either up here at the top or in the middle of the home screen. So how this tool works is that it defaults to the current year. And for that year, it will show you all of the legislation that's been that we're tracking for that year. And then from there, you sort of filter down to whatever you're more interested in. The years category is the only one that's sort of additive instead of filtering down. So you can see where we already have some legislation that's been pre-filed for 2026, and then we have all the years going back to 2021. I'm just gonna jump onto all years, which can take a second to load, but if you do all years, you can see we have over 8,000 bills going covering all 50 states and DC. So then after year, the next option is states. So pretty straightforward filter. You can either scroll through and check the states that you want, or start typing and it'll narrow it down for you. You can select as many or as few states as you'd like. The next one is bill numbers. So this would be, if you're look on a state legislature site, or if you're reading an article in the newspaper and there's a bill number mentioned and you want to really just dig in and look up exactly what that specific bill is, you can put in number. So like I know 202 was a big Georgia omnibus bill that was enacted in 2021 that got a lot of national attention. So you can see when you put in the specific bill number, it filters that result down. So there's just the one bill showing up for you. I'll dig in a moment on exactly what the bill profile contains, but in terms of filtering it down, if you know a specific bill number, that's how you would use this drop down. The next drop filter is the stage. So this is sort of where the bill is in the legislative process from pre-filed through enactment or veto. One note on this is that it really is like the latest stage that the bill is at. So if you wanted to see bills that had at least passed a chamber, you need to select pass first chamber, pass second chamber committee, pass second chamber, and then, depending on your needs, you may or may not want to include enacted or vetoed. But if you just select pass first chamber, then you won't get in your results a bill that has passed the first chamber and then passed the second chamber committee. So if you want to sort of have that more full picture of everything that has at least passed a chamber, you need to select those additional tags. The other note here is that our default is to include bills that have failed. Usually that's because the legislature has adjourned for the year. But if you want to exclude failed bills, you can turn off this toggle here, and then that will narrow down your results further to just the bills that are currently active. So like this search, what we're looking at right now, would be bills that are still alive in state legislatures that have at least passed a chamber, but haven't been enacted or vetoed yet. So that's sort of what you would be looking at with these options selected. So I'll bring that back to the wider view. Then bill impact is our assessment of the impact of the bill as a whole. We'll get into in a second our more narrow assessments of impact based on specific issues, but overall, that our assessment of the impact of a bill, which is either improves or restricts voter access or election administration, neutral, which is really if a bill is like making a technical change that we don't think is going to impact either voter access or election administration, and then mixed or unclear is sort of two things. One is either, we just don't feel confident in making an assessment. That would be the unclear side. Or mixed. Sometimes we see, for example, coming out of the 2020 election, there was a good number of states that were sort of moving in different directions on mail voting and in-person early voting, and we sometimes saw that in one bill. So that would be an example of a mixed, is like a bill that is improving access to in-person early voting, but restricting access to mail voting. Then issues is where you can see our sort of broad issues that we're tracking in terms of voter registration, mail voting, in-person voting, ID requirements, like disenfranchisement and rights restoration based on criminal convictions, all the way through like some of the interference with election administration is sort of our category we came up with in the fallout of the 2020 election, where we saw this sort of new phenomenon of states not looking at legislation that wasn't necessarily about restricting voter access, but was about sort of messing with local election administrators and the way elections were run. And you can select either as many of these as you want. So we sort of like we break up mail voting into bills that are about requesting mail ballots, bills that are about permanent mail voting lists, bills that are about universal mail ballots, states, and then bills that are about returning, verifying, and curing mail ballots. So that's sort of broken up into four separate issue areas, but you can choose all of them or as few of them as you'd like. Then going into sub-issues, this for the next two filters, you have to have an issue selected, at least an issue selected. So if, for example, you wanted to see bills that both had to do with returning mail ballots and in-person early voting, um, well, for one it defaults to including bills that include any of the issues you selected. But if you want to narrow it down to only bills that have both of what you've selected, you can switch this from any to all, and that will narrow it down to bills where within that same bill there are provisions about returning mail ballots and in-person early voting. Once you go to sub-issue, once you've selected issues, then you can go to the sub-issues, which are really specific types of policies that a bill could contain. So, for example, something that there's been a lot of activity around this year is states eliminating postmark grace periods, which is like where the state would allow ballots that were postmarked by election day to be received post-election day and counted. We've seen a lot of states eliminating those and requiring all ballots to be received by the close of polls on election day. So that's an example of a policy that we have, that specific way to narrow down to the bills that would implement that policy. Then on the early voting side, since that's also selected, you can do something like Saturdays. We can look at just bills that would expand or restrict access to Saturday early voting. So that's really like across all the issues, we have around 800 specific labels we apply to bills for the different policy changes that they would make. And then on issue impacts, so this is the same sort of scheme we apply to the overall impact of the bill, but specific to that issue area. So if you wanted to see, for example, the type of bill I mentioned before that would restrict uh, voters' ability to sort of return mail ballots and improve access to in-person early voting, you can see by selecting both of those and then switching this to all, you can see the bills were within that one bill. It would both move in different directions on those two things. So then I'm gonna get into a little so the results are displayed as this table here, and you can click on a bill profile in the results, and it will give you the sort of top line details about the bill. This was a bill, an Arizona bill from this past year that was vetoed by the governor. So we have this information about the bill, including the bill author and party, the fact that it was vetoed. And then we have our summary of the bill. So there's both this sort of top line summary of what the bill would do, the major provisions, including the fact that it was vetoed by Governor Hobbs on July 1st, 2025. And then we get into a much more detailed summary of all the different provisions. And you can see at the bottom of the bill profile all of the different specific policy tags that were applied to the bill. So these are the different things that, if you selected them from that sub-issues dropdown, these would be the different policies you could search for to get this bill as a result. And you can also set up alerts for yourself for a specific bill. If it's, once we get into more legislative sessions picking up in January, if there's a bill that you're interested in following, you can create an email alert for yourself so that if there's updates on that bill, like if it passes a committee, passes a chamber, if it's amended, that you'll get an email alert from that.
Chris, can I ask you a question
Yep.
about that? So it shows that it was an amended bill. Is there a way to see the original bill and then see what the amendments were? Does it track the amendments, like how they changed it? I'm just
Um,
curious if you can see the original language and then see it, like if it had gone to committee and then they said take this out or they added something in, is there a way to see what those changes are so that you're not being tricked, I guess?
yeah. So it not in like a side by side way. We do this bill, I guess, isn't a great example, but we do have some like if provisions were amended out of a bill, we do sort of keep that log of what what was amended out of the original version. But if it's something that's amended in, we're really just talking about the live version of the bill. So that would not necessarily be clear in some states. If you go to the bill text itself, they mark them up in different ways. So the bill text, we have the link to the actual bill text here. Um, and how much that's going to give you is going to vary from state to state, how clear it is what was amended in. So yeah, you can see, you can also sort this however you'd like. It defaults to recent action, but if you can sort it by state name, bill number, date of introduction. You can see like this bill is pre-filed for the 2026 session, doesn't have an intro date yet because it hasn't formally been introduced. And then just some final notes on what to do once you have results. You can download results as a CSV file if you want to get sort of out of the website and have your own document with all the bill information that's responsive to your search. You can create a link to a saved search. So if this is, your search you wanted to run and you wanted to sort of continue to keep an eye on what met these criteria, you can click this copy link to save search. And sorry, I should have mentioned these options here are only show up if you're logged into an account, which is free. But you do just sort of to get these options need to be logged in to a free account. That's super easy to make. Just give an email address. Um, but if you do this copy link to save search, that creates a custom URL that then if you want to go to that in the future, you can go right to that saved search and you don't need to like recreate it. It will save all of your parameters that you set up for your search for you. And then you can also create an email alert for a search itself. So rather than like picking a bill and setting up a search for that bill, you can set up the criteria or like the types of policies or legislation that you're looking to track and set up an alert for that. So if I wanted to, see all the bills that would eliminate a postmark grace period, I could set up create an alert for that. And then for the rest of that legislative session, if there was new legislation introduced or if legislation passed a committee or chamber that would eliminate the postmark grace period, I would get an email alert letting me know that the bills that met my search criteria had been moving through the legislative process. So, gonna pause there and see if there are any questions before I sort of move on to the sort of other half of the site where we have overviews of current election law across the states.
Does does the site cover all bills or just all bills voter right related? I mean, I know it's a voter rights lab, but
Yeah, so it's only election bills. I mean, some of them are more about like election administration, but it's only about election law.
specifically, okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Or if you've used the tool? Okay, doesn't look like we have any
All right.
questions.
Okay, so I'll sort of move on to the other half of the site then. So like I said, the other part of the site is current law across the states, and you can sort of get at that same information two different ways. One is looking by issue, and the other is looking by state. So we're going to start looking by issue. So going back to that example I provided of the postmark deadline question, this is if you go to our issue page, so this is the page about returning, verifying, and curing mail ballots. You can see that for 2025, on that topic, we're tracking a little over 300 bills in 44 states. And so for each of the sort of data points we track, we have a map. So you can see here is what is required from a voter to cast a mail ballot. Is basic identifying information sufficient, or are there additional hurdles? Additional hurdles would be something like, do you need to provide a driver's license number, or some states you need a witness or notary signature on your ballot return envelope. So those would be the types of things that we would put in that additional hurdles bucket. And then there's like the policy I mentioned before of the deadlines and whether it needs to be received by the close of polls or if a ballot with a postmark before or on election day is considered timely. And so you can see really that range of state policies on that, including the couple outliers of Louisiana requiring ballots be received the day before election day, and Ohio allowing that grace period for ballots received after election day, but requiring that the postmark actually be the day before election day rather than election day itself. And in addition to the sort of map view we have for each of these, so let me take a look at Kentucky. You can see we have these, like we call them cards for each state for each question. And there's a longer form explanation of like specifically for Kentucky, ballots must be received by the close of polls at 6 p.m. on election day. And then we have the statutory sites. So that's, if you were to look at the current state law in the current like state code, these are where you would look for the information supporting this answer. And we have those for all these states. You can sort of scroll through and see the answers for all the states along with the legal citations. And we have that sort of similar pages for all the issues. So if you wanted to look at early voting, you can go to early voting. You can see almost every state offers in-person early voting at this point. If you wanted to look, we have a map of when this first day of early voting is. You can see what weekend availability looks like across all the states. And again, if you want the more detailed answers, you can look at the individual state cards and really get in the weeds on, for example, on this one, the specifics of what weekend early voting looks like in that state. Then the other side of the surveys of current state law is you can look at an individual state page. So you can either get to that from going at the top to look at this map and select the state that you want to view, or if you're looking at a one of these issue pages and looking at the national picture, you can click through by clicking here, see all existing state laws in Arizona, and that will bring you to Arizona's state page. So on all the state pages, we have this sort of headline of, again, we're tracking 69 bills impacting 18 issue areas. You can click through there to get to a pre-populated search for the bills we're tracking in that state for the current legislative session. And then we also have these top lines of different voter access issues and also putting them in national context. So you can see this is for Arizona. They don't have same-day registration or automatic voter registration at the DMV. And we sort of put that in perspective here, that 28 states and DC offer same-day registration and 25 states and DC have or are implementing automatic voter registration. Same thing with mail voting access, what ID is required for in-person and mail voting, and then what the in-person early voting looks like. And then if you go down on the state page, it's the same information as is on the issue pages, but it's organized just all the questions in a row for that state. So you can read through, or if you know you want to read about ID requirements in Arizona, you can click ID requirements on the side, and that'll show you this much more detailed view of the ID requirements in Arizona. And in the same way you can get from the issue pages to a state page, if you're on the state page and thinking, I want to see what the national picture is on this topic, you can either click Learn More here to go to the overall issue page, or if you are reading a specific answer and you want to see go right to, okay, what's the national picture look like on this topic? You can click on this question, and that will bring you right to the national map on that topic. So, for example, on ID requirements here, we have this map that breaks down sort of for every state is ID requested or required. This is sort of a second iteration of this because we realized there were a lot of states that maybe at first glance look like there's an ID requirement, but in practice, like they're asking everyone for an ID, but there are such that there is still an ability to vote in person without an ID, as long as you sort of, sometimes it's going to be a provisional ballot, sometimes you're going to need to sign an affidavit, but we realize sort of looking at the national perspective that it really isn't just a question of is there a voter ID law or not. It's much more sort of nuanced in terms of how strict is that requirement. All right, I'll pause again there and see if there's any questions on our surveys of current state law.
So I do have a question. In states where it says the ID is not requested, how do they validate those voters?
So it's gonna vary among those states. So for some states, there's like a poll book that you have to sign where you're signing into the poll book and they're like comparing a signature to a signature on file. In some states, they're asking you some type of personal information that then they're again like comparing to what's on file in a poll book. It varies state by state within among those.
Okay. I do not live in one of those states. That's
Yeah.
why I'm asking.
Yeah.
I have a voter ID card. I can use my driver's license, like either one of those things they usually let us use. But
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of variety among states on that point.
okay, no other questions.
All right. Well, the last thing I'll just put in a bit of a plug for is we also have this analysis section that sort of provides our at least monthly write-ups on a different uh, topic involving election law, usually focused on legislation in the states. So, for example, we just put out a 2025 roundup of where election law activities were in all the states that sort of has some maps, goes through different trends we saw over the year, and we put those out. Oops, I lost it. Put those out monthly and at least monthly and have, sort of deeper dives on different topics. We also have a an email list that you can sign up for. There's a sign up at the bottom. So we do both a monthly email that has those longer form pieces, and then we also have what we call the markup, which is a weekly during the legislative session. When state legislatures are slower, we drop down to every other week. But looking ahead to 2027, that's a weekly email that we put out that's sort of an overview of the state election laws moving through all the different legislatures. And also, we do year round if there are updates based on legislation or executive actions, anything going on. But during legislative session, we try to really focus in on what's going on in the state legislatures.
This is great information, especially for those of you who are in states which based on the number that Chris just showed us, that's almost all the states have legislation being brought um, to the committee about changing voter laws, whether it's making them better or making them harder for access to the polls. So this falls under Protect Democracy in one of the areas of advocacy that MWAG it works in. So our advocacy team watches this closely. And I don't know, Christy, if you want to share anything about how MWAG's tracking this or what we'll be doing during the legislative sessions coming up. Each state obviously is tracking their spaces individually with their teams, but um,
Yeah, I just dropped in the chat. We're big readers of Voting Rights Lab's newsletters, both of them on the MWAG advocacy side, since we follow a lot of voting rights law. And we use this tool a lot. And we have enjoyed it so much. That's why we wanted to make sure that all of you got the opportunity to hear from Chris and Voting Rights Lab so that you can use this tool for your own use. We do have active advocacy teams this session this session meaning starting at the first of the year in 3 states, but a lot of you are not in those 3 states. So if you want to follow along in your own state and see what's going on, this is a really amazing tool, and we're really lucky to have Voting Rights Lab support, and they do all this great work that we can rely on and don't have to do ourselves. So we really appreciate them and our partnership.
and I would also add that if you are in a state that doesn't have a designated legislative team that's watching bills, but you are interested in watching bills, go on to MWEG Central to your state space, and you can put some information in there for support and just say, hey, friends, I live in this state. There's just a few members here, but I just wanted to make you aware of this is what's happening. And you can share a link to Voter Rights Lab so that and just show them the information or just share it. That's the best way to educate our neighbors and our family and friends different ways of what's there, because a lot of people we've come to find are not actively tracking bills, or they're not aware of what is in the bill. So they maybe hear it in the news or they hear people talking about it, but they're not totally aware of the substance of that and how it might affect them or the people that they love. So it's I highly, highly recommend that if this is something you're interested in tracking and you are actively tracking, to share it with in your state space on MWAG Central. So, and if you're not signed up on MWAG Central, I would recommend you do that, because there's a lot of great information shared there of events and just things to keep our members up to date. So that's a great place to be. And you can join the different areas of advocacy that you're interested in and follow those as well. So thank you, Chris, for introducing us to this great tool and inviting us to join the newsletter. If anybody has any other questions before we go, I don't see lots of praise in, oh, Hope, did you have a question? Oh, just raised your hand by accident. I think you're on mute. I don't hear you. Can you guys hear Hope? It's really quiet. Maybe you can put your question in the chat. But I do want to say thanks to those who have joined the grows. This will be our last grow of 2025. And so this is a great setup going into the legislative sessions, which will start in the new year. And each state has different lengths of their legislative sessions. I live in a state that goes really long. So, oh, she's just, thank you. She lives in I can't say that, Cochise County, Arizona. I'm also in Arizona, so we have long legislative session. And we also have a lot of problems. And if you're up, so where Hope lives is up closer to a lot of reservation areas, and the access to voting has been limited, at least from my knowledge, where they have closed some polling spaces and made it trickier to get out and vote day of. So if you are not mailing your ballot, then in that case, this is one of those where we want to keep access to mail-in ballots in our state. So this is why we would track those bills, because in our state, they're trying to limit access to those things. So
Yeah,
that looks
definitely
like it.
familiar with Cochise County.
Yeah, it was tricky. So anyway, if there are no other comments or questions, then I'm going to again thank Chris and Christy and everybody for being here, and tell you to have a happy new year. We'll see you guys in January.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks.